Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Buddhang Saranang Gacchami, Dhammang Saranang Gacchami, Sanghang Saranang Gacchami, Dutiyampi Buddhang Saranang Gacchami, Dutiyampi Dhammang Saranang Gacchami, Dutiyampi Sanghang Saranang Gacchami, Tatiyampi Buddhang Saranang Gacchami, Tatiyampi Dhammang Saranang Gacchami, Tatiyampi Sanghang Saranang Gacchami. So friends listening in over Zoom, welcome to this day 2 of the Dhamma talk during this retreat. And so, the reason why we practice meditation is, of course, everyone has perhaps different reasons for practicing meditation. Some people come into meditation for medical reasons, kind of like, simple things like how to lower your blood pressure or, how to control anger or some other, lower the blood pressure and so on. But other people come for the mental, the mental medicine. And actually Dhamma is really a medicine for the mind, because as we all know that so many physical ailments too are linked to the mind, in the psychosomatic kind of syndrome. But the Buddha outlined his teachings, over this nature of suffering. And of course, we know the first noble truth, the cause that suffering exists. And basically, suffering is all forms of physical suffering, mental suffering, but especially the mental suffering. And you could also call a level of spiritual suffering. That means not knowing the truth. So not having any anchor in life, not knowing the truth about the mind. People have just been led on with what other people have told them, or copying others, believing what others believed, and never really questioning things, and then wind up getting into a lot of trouble. And in the second noble truth, the Buddha mentioned that craving was the source of suffering. Now, certainly craving is a source of suffering. That means uncontrolled or unbridled craving, where we, in order to satisfy our greed or desires or craving, whether it's for physical things or mental things, but we resort to unskillful actions, and then sort of living outside the law of cause and effect. But even though the second noble truth states that craving is the cause of suffering, we have to ask ourselves, well, what is the cause of craving? And, well, I just sort of mentioned it. It's not knowing the truth about the mind. and not knowing the truth about also the laws of nature, and especially like the law of karma, and not knowing the truth about how the mind operates, and that we've been disconnected from the truth, not knowing the truth about the mind. And that's really where the Buddha was an expert, in understanding the truth about the mind. Because even modern day psychologists, even psychotherapists, even though they might understand some aspects about the mind, the mental states, and so on, they even don't really hold a candle to the wisdom of the Buddha's understanding about the mind and the deeper inner workings of the mind. And the reason for that is because probably most of the modern day psychologists and psychotherapists, they go to university and they learn the methods taught in universities. And unfortunately, universities don't teach attaining jhanas and developing insight meditation and telling people to develop insight knowledges and the stages of enlightenment. So therefore, they're not a PhD. You could call the Buddha really the only or one of the very few persons in the world you could say that deserves to be called a PhD of mind science, where others maybe just have sort of a bachelor's degree or maybe a master's degree. But the Buddha had, and the reason for that is because he had developed his powers of meditation, and especially of mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. But anyway, so coming back to this, not understanding the mind, there's specifically, the Buddha explained that our body and mind is layered with the five aggregates. You all heard of the five aggregates in the teachings of the Buddha. In fact, the first noble truth, the Buddha's definition was that, birth, sickness, old age, and death are suffering. Not getting what you want, getting what you don't want is suffering. And then he summed it up and said, in short, the five aggregates of clinging are suffering. And that's why the five aggregates form the major topic of understanding the mind. And four of those aggregates are mental factors. And so I want to go through that a little bit more. We've already touched on that, of course, but I want to go into that a little bit more, because especially on retreats, or especially for people that are practicing vipassana meditation, not understanding this and, not being able to really see how these aggregates or these groups of grasping are what keep our mind revolving in that process of samsara, or birth and death. And so I also want to touch on the real meaning of birth and death. So the five aggregates, basically, it's sort of like a five-layered cake, if you can imagine that. Or actually a better analogy would be five concentric circles. So let's say you have a circle, like, a big circle. Then just inside that circle, you have a little smaller one. Inside that, you have a smaller one. Inside of that, you have a smaller one. And then in the middle, there's even a smaller one. So that is an analogy of how our body and mind has these different layers to it. And the body is the base layer. The body is the outer layer. And then that means the senses, the physical body and the senses. And then, of course, it includes the external world too, what you're seeing, smelling, tasting, hearing, and so on. Belongs to that aggregate of form. And it's called an aggregate of form because the word aggregate in English means like a collection, a collection of many things, an aggregate. So an aggregate of form means all the different material forms that we've experienced in life, let alone, let's say, coming even from past lives, but just in this life, since you were a baby, right? When you first open your eyes, or you saw your mother or father or the doctor, and then little by little as you grew up, everything you experienced, what you saw, heard, smelled, tasted, the mind remembers those things, and that becomes in your memory. And so that a whole aggregate of material forms that we've experienced, that comes into play through the memory is continually being brought up over and over and over again each moment. Because every time I look at a similar object, I recognize that. Now, if you see something you didn't never experience before, you would have a hard time, you wouldn't be able to really identify it so clearly or easily. So now, underneath the aggregate of form is the feelings. And actually the aggregate of forms is basically, as we mentioned, I think this morning to the group here meditating, is basically, what is material form made up of? What is material form made up of? What is this body made up of? What is Mita made up of? What is a tree made up of? It's cells, right? And what are cells made up of? Molecules? Is it? Tell me. I flunked college chemistry. No, not really. And what are cells made up of? Oh, excuse me. What are the molecules made up of? Atoms, yeah. Even though we know there are smaller little subatomic particles, but it's just for sake of, we'll say the atom is the smallest particle, right? We know it's not, but with just sake of argument. And basically, what is what are atoms made up of? Electrons. That's what I was actually trying to remember. Electrons. Why is it called electrons? Right. Okay. Yes, electrons. So basically, matter, all forms of matter, even a solid rock, are just condensed energy. If you break it down into that ultimate sort of level, and basically it's a vibration. So anything you feel sets up a vibratory wave through the senses, because that's how our nervous system and brain works, through kind of energy waves. This may sound a little bit intellectual, but most people who have a high school, college education, they probably understand that. So even material matter, that's why many times in meditation I say, feel the vibrations is what you're feeling, visible vibration, tactile vibration, and that's its elementary breakdown. It's just some kind of energy. But so that is also part of the aggregate of form, is basically these vibrations of earth, fire, water, air, called the four elements, right? So anything you feel in the body it feels solid, like, squeeze your hand, there's something solid there, right? And then now you might be feeling some heat, when it's hot, that there's temperature in the body. And we all know that there's 98 degrees is about the temperature of the body. And if that fluctuates, we can get sick if it fluctuates up and down. So there's the heat element. That's also a vibration. And then there's also air and movement, spaces between the cells too, that allows us to move. And that's called the air element. It's the air moving through the body that actually, for one thing, the breathing that you're breathing keeps you alive, but the air and spaces between the cells and so on allow you to move. It's like hydraulics. If it was just totally solid, you couldn't move, but because there's air there, and then when you have the desire to move, it's just like a hydraulics on a tractor or something. Very similar, The hydraulic fluid goes through the thing and it causes the arm to lift up, move around. So the same way, all of our limbs, so that's the air element. So whenever you feel movement and so on, we say, I am moving, but actually it's the air element that's moving. Anyway, this is a little bit deeper type of Abhidhamma breakdown, but even we find it in the suttas too. And then the water element is the fluids in the body. So we all know that there's water in the body, and that means also blood, anything that's fluid nature, blood, pus, and of course the water itself is the water element. So anyway, these comprise, I don't want to get too intellectual, but it is a very interesting part of that sort of analysis of what we're composed of. So anyway, the aggregate of form. So basically anything you feel is one of those. Even you hear a sound and you remember what the sound is. So even the sound wave going through you, it belongs to the aggregate of form. Or even an odor, what you smell. But then each one of those produces a feeling. That means it's sensed as something, a pleasant feeling, or a painful feeling, or a neutral feeling. So these are called the three types of feeling, the aggregate of feelings. So with every aggregate of form, with every form that we've ever experienced, we've learned a feeling that comes with it. That it produces either a pleasurable feeling in us, or an unpleasant feeling in us, or a neutral feeling in us. But the ones that are the most important are the painful feelings and the pleasurable feelings, because these are the things that we develop our desires and aversions about, which I'll get to in a moment. But the neutral sensation, there are many neutral sensations. Like in your meditation, you're probably, feeling hundreds, if not thousands, of different sensations in 1 hour of meditation, but most of them you didn't really pay attention to. But the ones that stood out were the painful ones, probably mostly, right? Anybody see that when all of a sudden a quick painful feeling arises, how quickly it grabs the mind? Of course, how many people had some pleasurable feelings too? Even pleasurable body feelings. Because there are a lot of pleasurable body feelings to be felt. And I'm not talking about necessarily erotic ones, but even just very subtle, like the subtle pulse of blood in your arteries, or other little waves of sensation. That means those electromagnetic waves that are moving through the body. A lot of them are very pleasant, but they're very subtle. But anyway, some of them, like the piti and the sukha, those are very pleasurable feelings, so it's easy to get attached to that. But anyway, so that's the second concentric circle, is the feeling. So all these material vibrations are giving off these feelings that we form attachments to. And the combination of the material vibration and the feeling gives rise to the perception. And the perception is the ability to identify the object. And basically that it becomes developed through learning language, but it also is the ability for the mind to single that object out from the others. It's sort of like one-dimensional. If there wasn't perception, this form wouldn't stand out as appearing different from all these other things behind me or in front of me. So it's the perception process of the brain that takes those waves of energy or those vibrations and sort of forms an outline of them that then looks different from the other things around it. And then you identify it through language. You identify, or we can identify what a male form looks like, or a female form looks like, or a difference between a cat and a dog, and every kind of object. So that's the perception, and that doesn't have any like or dislike based with it either. Although it does normally, it's connected because it's connected with the feeling and the vibration. And we've learned that. And so, for example, let's say a young child, if they have a cat in the house, and the cat walked by, and then the young child reached out and grabbed the cat's tail, and the cat turned around and scratched the baby, and the baby would, feel that pain, and then he would become afraid of this cat. That's form. So he would identify this black form or whatever it is, with a spot over here, as something producing pain. So that perception, that would arise with it. So the perception is also, has the tinge of pleasurable or painful association with it. And so these things are basically born together. From the time we were born, it happens automatically. We have very little control over that. That the material vibration, the pleasurable and painful feeling, and the perception of the object. And even the pleasurable and painful perception is unique to that object for this individual, because people will have different experiences. Like, let's say, a type of food. If somebody looks at in my case, when I was younger, right, if I saw an avocado, I would have an aversion, that perception of avocado, some green fruit, right? All you people listening in Europe, you know my avocado story. So every time I saw that avocado, I had an unpleasant perception, because I thought that they were, I didn't like them, the taste. And, but somebody else, like my father or mother, they looked at avocado, they got a pleasant sensation. So, and then later on, of course, in my famous story, I turned that painful sensation into a pleasant sensation. So that objects actually don't have any inherent pleasure or pain about them. It's particularly the relationship to each person that object has had with them, depending on the circumstances, as they grew up. And that is able to change. Usually people don't change those because they get very opinionated and clinging to those. But it is possible to change what used to give you a painful feeling could turn into a pleasurable feeling, or what used to give you a painful, pleasurable feeling could later on give you a painful feeling. And I'll give the example of relationships, right? Because when you first have a relationship with somebody, the person might have produced a pleasurable feeling in you, but because of whatever circumstances, and there was some breakup, and then later on that same face wouldn't produce the same kind of feeling in you. So, but anyway, it's the perception. So those three so far, those three aggregates, the material vibration. I prefer to call it material vibration rather than form, because people get attached to this idea and think it's actually some physical solid form. But within the nervous system, like when you look at here, this form isn't flying through your eyeball, right? It's just some color or vibrations, energy vibrations coming off of this form. And there's that what is striking your eyeball. And then the mind turning that into something that appears, kind of solid. So anyway, these three things: material vibration, the feeling, and the perception. Now, the fourth of the aggregate is the volitional formations. And this is probably the most important one, the one that we can actually change. Because the volitional formations means the reactions that we take based on this vibration, feeling, and perception. We take a reaction to it. If it's something pleasurable, then we have some kind of attraction reaction. We want to get close to it, or react to it in some way, to have it. And it's if it's a painful sensation, then that reaction would be to stay away from it. And there are plenty of examples, like even with our animals, right? So people see Mita, say, oh, Mita, they want to go and pet it, But if it was a snake, they wouldn't, want to do that. So anyway, these are just funny little examples. But but it's the volitional formations which are where we create the karma. And so karma really is the most important of those aggregates, the volitional formations, the fourth ones, because you can't do much about the form, feeling, and perception. That's already kind of ingrained in the nervous system. And even whether I like or hate it, when I look at an object, it'll always be that object. It'll always be, let's say a female form or a male form. Even if I hated or liked it, it would still be that form. And a tree is a tree. A dog is a dog. But so those perceptions usually won't change. But it's the reaction to the perception that we can change. And that involves in this fourth aggregate. So that is so again, would be the fourth concentric circle. So again, if you can keep that little image in mind, because again, everything starts at the outer skin. It's where visible objects strike the eye, sounds strike the ear, odors strike the nose, flavors strike the tongue, and thoughts, of course, are a little bit, they're inside, but at least those five physical forms, they start at the outer level, but then they go into the nervous system, and traveling through the delicate nervous system to be picked up as these vibrations and the feelings. And then when they reach the brain, it turns them into perceptions. And then we react to them. So each one is subtler than the next one. That's why the body aggregate is the easiest one to pay attention to, because it's the closest to us, so to speak, and it's the easiest one to feel. Then the the feelings, the vibrations are more difficult to feel because our attention is normally, it's not even on the body, it's outside of the body, because we're looking around at the outside world. And only once in a while as you bring your attention back to the body here, right? You're going shopping and you're seeing all these things out on the shelves and there's other people walking around. So 90% of our day is spent outside of our body, so to speak, looking at things outside of us. So we are not able to really feel those vibrations going through us, really, or the feelings that are arising, not seeing them so clearly, or in their initial stages. So the volitional formations is the urge. So the easiest way to try to understand that is the urges. Now, how many people, when you were meditating today, notice some urge? Anybody notice some urges? What type of urges were there? Yeah, an urge to scratch an itch, an urge to wiggle your toe, urge to open your eye to see if Bhante was sleeping, or an urge to go turn up the air or off the air conditioner, or wish there weren't so many sirens going off down on the road. So even that's an urge. So those are probably the most obvious of the volitional formations, of the reactions, because then the urge leads to thoughts and scheming. How are you going to accomplish this? So the urge is probably the very first thing that arises when that painful sensation is felt. But then you have to decide, if I move, Bhante may hear me. I better, keep still, and so on. And this is an example. How many people have thoughts like that in their mind? Or so many other thoughts. So anyway, the urge, and then the decisions that you make to either satisfy, to get the pleasurable feeling, and to get away from the painful feeling. And then, so that also, yes, thank you. That means the karma. So volitional formations are where we create the karma. And it's here where actually meditation practice plays its most important role. Because you can't change really the physical body. People try to, but, and you can't change the vibrations really that are going through, or the perceptions, but it's the decision. You can't even really change the urge, because that's kind of a very gut instinctual thing that arises. But you can observe the urge and say, this urge to move has arisen, and you can delay. You can delay the reaction to that object. And it's in that few seconds space of that delaying the reaction that's where the mindfulness, the concentration, the mindfulness, and the wisdom plays its important aspect in the practice of the meditation. And we'll talk some more about that perhaps later, about applying this mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. So anyway, you react to the object, and then whenever you react to the object, that strengthens that volitional formation. That means that it somehow strengthens that habit, or the neural pathway. You've all heard about neural pathways, right? So basically, that's how this body and mind operates, is just through these neural pathways, which is just basically like electric wires, going to so many different things. But you can flip a switch, and you can cause the energy to go in one way or go in another way. But normally people don't have the ability to flip the switch. And that's where the development of concentration and mindfulness and wisdom gives you the ability to delay. The mindfulness delays the reaction. You haven't flipped the switch yet, but mindfulness delays the reaction. And then the concentration also creates a kind of a space around that object. And then the mindfulness is the remembering, is the reflecting on, and the wisdom. Is this object important to react to or not? And so that's the combination of mindfulness and wisdom. And then you decide, okay, I'm not going to react. I'm not going to raise my hand up and scratch the itch. And so if you're able to have that restraint, then it's like you're flipping the switch. That energy is not going out to raise your arm. That means the air element is not being stimulated, because that's what happens. It's like flip a switch on the hydraulic and the arm comes up. Now you're not switching the switch on pulling the lever on the hydraulic for your arm to go up. And so it stays down. And then you endure that and you see that it changes in a few seconds, that itch goes away. How many people have noticed that? I don't know. I don't think it's just me, but how many people have watched an itch and then, at first they wanted to scratch it, but then they just sort of endure, and then all of a sudden it like vanished within 5 seconds or so. Or how many had that experience when you started to lift your hand up? The reason why we have you slowly lift your hands up, you know what the reason is? If you decide to rub or scratch something, do it slowly. Because if you do it quick, then there's no time to change your mind. But if you do it slowly, and all of a sudden it vanished before you initiated. But before, you're not giving it that space to vanish, because you're taking it to be something impermanent or permanent. So you don't think it's going to vanish. But now you give it time to vanish by moving slowly, and then it vanishes, and then you don't have to waste your energy to complete the action. And maybe, you're in a hurry, you got a long fingernail, maybe you cut yourself. That ever happened to somebody? You're scratching and you cause blood to come up. So, you can see that all these things, even though we laugh about them, this is the reality. It's all part of that nature of conditioning. So it's that, the volitional, that aggregate of volitional formations, which is really where the practice of Dhamma is done, really, actually. And then we have the fourth aggregate. The fifth one. Okay, that's consciousness. Well, consciousness is the observing, is what has been observing the whole process. Actually, to take that 5 aggregate analogy, it would be like there's, all those 5 aggregates are actually within the bubble of the consciousness, because even the material form is an object within consciousness. The feeling is an object within consciousness. The volitional formations and thoughts are an object within the consciousness. It's that knowing faculty. But in the ignorant person, that consciousness has the sense of I with it. So it has the ego consciousness with it. So that's why I usually just term it ego consciousness. Because unless you're an arhat, If there's any arhants here, let me know and I'll change my mode of speech. Everyone has ego consciousness until one has attained arahantship. That means a sense of I is still there in some kind of degree. And it's the I, of course, that thinks it's doing all these things. And that's what's clinging and identifying with this. And it's very interesting. They call it I consciousness, right? What else is called the I consciousness? This I, right? So there's a fleshy I. Why do they call the ego I? Why didn't they bring up some other name for it? Got any ideas? I have one. Because the I is the strongest sense. Everyone has the craving to see. And probably if I asked anybody here, if for some reason you had to have one of your 5 senses broken or not working, you would probably rather, I'd rather be deaf than blind. Most people probably would be rather, because at least with if you're deaf, you can learn Braille, things like that, right? Or the other senses, but it's a craving to see. So we see out the I. So the ego is also looking out the I. And, you can see when you look around, there's this greed to want to, what is that? 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 Look at everything. So anyway, that's just an aside. But so that I consciousness, ego consciousness that's why it's called an aggregate of clinging, because we cling to it as being myself. The idea that you're the one who's seeing, hearing, tasting, smelling, touching, you're the one that's alive. For most people, that's what they regard to be their self, or maybe even their soul, I don't know. But, that's that sense of that, that's the strongest attachment. So anyway, so all together, all those 5 aggregates, they all come together in each sense experience. But they come together because of contact, and then they vanish. But they come up again very quickly, because the nervous system is operating at millions of bytes per second. That means the electromagnetic energy that's running through the nervous system, and the mind processes data faster than the fastest supercomputer, and faster than Google. Meaning, the mind is working, and each of those is a different, is an arising and vanishing. So I've mentioned this before, but a graph. Do you remember me mentioning this about the electrocardiogram or electroencephalogram? That measures the brain waves, or even the sound waves, or the heart waves. Let's just say the brain waves. The graph, it's like that, right? And if you slow it down, or even if you have these audio files on your computer, and you've ever done any editing with audio files, you see that too, these graphs. And they're incredibly compressed together. If you have it on a certain thing, you see one, but then you can stretch it out, and you see within that one, there are like hundreds of shorter ones, right? Is it? Anybody? So that's similar to how our brain is operating. And, it's somebody like the Buddha, it actually had the tremendous power of concentration to be able to actually see that. And to understand this 5 aggregate process. So anyway, those in one moment, even though you might feel that if you feel an itch, that is going on hundreds and thousands of times before you probably even have identified what it is. But each of those is an arising and vanishing. Each one of those little blips like that is a birth and death. We're talking about nanotechnology is a birth and death in the deepest sense. But we don't see that because our mind is slow, and because of clinging, we don't see that rapid arising and vanishing. And the mind just sort of lumps them all together, and then that's how it gets attached to things and thinks that things are permanent. But anyway, that 5 aggregate process is coming together that fast. All those aggregates, form, feeling, perception, volition, consciousness, are coming together in what is called a mind moment. A mind moment. But again, it's, just very small, one of those little blips in mind moment of like hearing, seeing, tasting, smelling, and touching. But because our rate of perception is slow and because of attachments, we don't see that. Because the mind stays on an object, and because of that, it doesn't see the rapid arising and vanishing. So that's how one of the reasons why we get attached to things. And so this morning when I was before the morning meditation, anybody remember the topic I was talking about in the morning meditation? The instructions before we started the 9 o'clock meditation. You forgot already. Nobody remembers. Who am I talking to? See, that's what we have to repeat over and over and over again.
You talked about awareness of consciousness.
Didn't I also mention turning into impermanence? Now you remember, right? And seeing how quickly things are arising and vanishing? Okay, well, this is what I'm kind of talking about now, this process of these moments of hearing, seeing, tasting, smelling, touching, and thinking that are arising and vanishing in that rapid way. And when you're meditating, and if you're not lost in your thoughts, if you're not sleeping, and if you're centered in the body, then that is only when you're able to then see how many things are. You may not see that exact arising and vanishing, but you can notice many, many things in the space of 1 or 2 seconds. You can identify or clearly feel hundreds, if not thousands, of sensations. If the mind is, calm enough, free from defilements, and that's why the concentration is necessary to be able to see that. Without it, you'll never see it. Yeah, turning up the power of the microscope. Because what happens when you turn up the power of a microscope, right? You see what previously you couldn't see. You see subtler details of the object. Right? So that's what, like every time you reach the first jhana, could be like turning up the power of the microscope to 50, and if you attain the second jhana, it'd be turning it up to 100, the third jhana 200, fourth jhana maybe 500. Like that, you see more and more clarity and details of these 5 aggregates. And that's how the Buddha became an expert in understanding the nature of the mind. Because who else would have done that? Hardly anybody. And Einstein probably didn't have that kind of mental power. Anyway, that's why this in the Vipassana meditation, that development of that perception of impermanence and the ability just to notice and let go, notice and let go. The reason why we can't notice many things is because the mind is clinging on to things. When it's clinging on to one particular things, then so many other things are not noticed. But when it's not clinging on, you then free up the mind. The mind expands. Normally when you're reacting to things, it's like you're looking through a keyhole. Oh, the pain in my knee. Oh, that sound. Oh, that sight. And you're kind of only, like this. But when you've developed concentration and you develop that centeredness in the body, then it's like you're seeing out like this. Both of your eyes are freed up. And you can see so many more things. You can hear sounds, you can feel sensations in the body, you can observe thoughts, basically almost simultaneously. And you can see the interactions that they produce as well. And that's why, it's important to first come to that level of developing that kind of initial, I prefer to just call it centeredness in the body rather than concentration, because when people use concentration, it kind of means different things for them, Actually, the concentration, it means calmness, it means tranquility. But you arrive at the tranquility through limiting your reactions to things. So you concentrate on an object like your breathing, then as you're able to follow the breath, the mind stops reacting to, these itches and scratches and sounds, and because that object now is filling up more of its mind. But the actual effect is you become tranquil. That means the nervous system becomes tranquilized. It's like getting an injection of a tranquilizer. But through that natural means of just not allowing your mind to be so scattered. And so the that concentration, basically, it's the tranquility. And the tranquility is what allows you to see these subtler levels of vibrations and so on. It's like the analogy of a glass of water. If you scooped out a glass of water from the gutter, you might have pieces of moss in it or brown color, it's kind of like a dirty color, right? So if a person never had clean water, maybe somebody somewhere, they never actually saw clear water. They've always had the, polluted water to drink and so on. They might think water is colored, dirty. But then what happens when you set that glass on a table and meat is not jumping up on the table and jiggling it, or the wind's not blowing, and then that little by little the impediments in the water go down to the bottom, and then the water becomes clear. So then that person might think, well, that's water. wow, they never saw clear water. Well, the average person has never saw clear consciousness because it's always colored by our reaction from these aggregates. And so we fail to see the clear, tranquil nature of present moment awareness. That's why we can't see present moment awareness. It's because our mind is always reacting to the past and future. These aggregates, the memories of the aggregates from the past, and projecting them into the future. Remembering what you looked like 20 years ago and then wanting to project that, into the future and all kinds of things. So, we don't see the clear nature of consciousness. But that is really, what the meditation practice is about, how the Buddha, was able to develop this specific form of meditation that was able to do that, this vipassana form of meditation, in which you're actually developing mindfulness and concentration. And by not reacting to things, you speed up the ability to notice many, many things very, very clearly and that are coming through your senses. And it helps you then to see the illusions that are created in that. So there's many more things that could be said by that, but about that. But I just wanted to mention. But that is the important part of the practice. Again, is first getting the mind, developing the ability to get the mind grounded and centered in the body. And that's, again, why I teach yoga and meditation, because people who are not practicing some form of body-centered discipline, they're going to have a very, very difficult time in learning how to stay, centered and feeling those subtle energies in the body. So doing the yoga exercise, exaggerates that, practicing Tai Chi, some other forms, maybe Qigong. These are also ways of sensitizing the awareness to stay centered in the body, to be in touch with those vibrations. The Buddha just took it a step further, not just to simply get in touch with the vibrations, but then to actually observe what the mind makes out of those vibrations. And creates monsters out of just empty vibrations, and so on. And that is, why we respect the Buddha. Like how many times in the day already we chanted Namo Tassa, maybe 3 times in the morning, because we recognize that he's genius when it comes to, in terms of the mind and figuring out the mind, and not only that, but giving the methods that we can train ourselves to gradually, help ourselves, because no one else is going to help you, by the way. No one else is going to help you. Your mother's not going to help you. Your father's not going to help you. Your husband, wife, girlfriend, boyfriend, not going to help you. I mean, they'll help you in different ways, of course, but not help you actually get inside your own mind. So, friends, I'm sorry if I bored any of you, but anyway, those of you who have been listening out there in Zoom land, so we're now going to, stand up and do a little standing meditation, maybe some round of walking as we did yesterday, and then sit down a little bit later to again try to tune into this. Okay, so go ahead and take a minute or two if you need to use the restroom. Come back and begin some standing awareness. Thank you.